probably know by now, there's nothing that's going to keep your saw running better or more safely than a nice sharp chain. Because always remember, a sharp chain is a safe chain. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to take you through the procedures for setting up and sharpening your chain, show you guys what to do, what to look for, how to get your proper alignments, and how to keep that chain as sharp as possible. And I'll also show you how to take down your depth gauges if needed. So things you're going to need. You're going to need a round file with a file guide. The nice thing about the file guide is it doesn't let the whole file go into the gullet of the chain. That keeps 80% of the file in the tooth of the chain and 20% out, which is what the manufacturer recommends. It also has witness marks on it, right here and here, that give you your proper angles, so you have your proper angles when you're sharpening. That is your witness mark, and it's not only telling you the proper angle to sharpen this, but it's also telling you how far you can sharpen this chain and still be considered safe. Once you sharpen it back to that witness mark, that chain can't be used anymore. Second thing you're going to need is a flat file. Now what you have is you have what they call depth gauges here. Some people call them rakers. This sets the depth gauge so the cutter can only take out the correct amount of wood that's what this chain's designed for. You'll need a raker gauge setting, and you're also going to need a bar groove cleaner. Now when I talked about the different chain sizes, there's different chain sizes of course for different size saws, and they use different size files. So as you can see, this chain is a much larger chain than that chain, and it would not use the same file. So you want to make sure you have the correct file. You'll notice I have the bar off the saw. You can either do it on the saw or off the saw. I prefer to do it off the saw. I like to lock the bar in a vise and have the chain moving freely across that bar. Okay, so let's talk about do's and don'ts. Always remember, you always file from the inside of the cutter to the outside. Always do all your left hands or your right hands first. Always do one and then the other. Don't go back and forth from side to side because you're going to lose count. You'll want to count each stroke. Once you do your worst cutter, if it takes 6 strokes to do it, then you want to do 6 strokes on every cutter. If you don't do that, the saw is going to start to lean one way or the other while you're cutting, and it's going to be whichever tooth is more aggressive, the right or the left. So you want to make sure you get them the same length. And you're going to sharpen this, you're going to count the strokes until you don't see that burnt part anymore. You just see nice, clean chrome. Could be 2 strokes, it could be 10 strokes. You don't know until you start to do it. You don't want to be too aggressive. Let the file do the work. You also want to make sure you use a file guide. Because if you don't use a file guide, you're going to put more than the 80% of the file into the tooth of the chain here, and you're going to start hooking it. When you start hooking it, it starts losing its strength. And then you're going to start breaking these. No matter how good you think you are, use a file guide. Something else I should probably mention is a lot of bars have a grease hole up here for this front sprocket that's up here. Rule of thumb is, if you're going to grease it every time you use a saw or never grease it. The reason you do that is because if when this hole fills up with dirt after multi-uses, when you go to grease it, that grease is going to take all that dirt, it's going to push it into the bearing. You don't want to do that. Most modern bars do not have an oiling hole anymore because these are permanently greased bearings. So just make sure, if you do have an oiling hole, either do it every time or don't do it at all. What you want to do also is go through the chain and try and find the cutter that has the most damage. And the way you tell, these are all chromed. You want to make sure that you get down to good chrome, and you'll be able to see black areas where the chrome has been wore off. So try and find the worst one, and that's the one we're going to start on. If you have a marker, my suggestion would be you mark this first one, so when you go around, you know where you started at. So on your file guide, there's going to be degree markings. This one says 30 degrees because it's the correct one for this chain. So that means the top plate angle right here should be at 30 degrees. I put a bigger chain in here so it'd be easier to see. But you'll see what we have is a right hand cutter and a left hand cutter. Right hand cutter, left hand cutter. This is the inside where this fold over comes this way. So this is the inside of the cutter, this is the outside. So you have to make sure that when you're doing this, that you're going from the inside of the cutter to the outside of the cutter. You want to line up this 30-degree witness mark with the bars so that it's perfectly in line, and you want to file from the inside to the outside. And you also want to count your strokes. Once you get to your worst one, you're going to want to count the strokes. So when you go line up that parallel, you're going to want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now after 5, I can see that this cutter is now perfectly cleaned up. Because I did a right hand cutter here, I want to do the next right hand cutter, which would be, I'd skip one, it goes right hand, left hand, right hand, left hand. I'll skip the left hand, I'll go to the next right hand, and I'll also line up that parallel, and I'll do 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'll go around the chain. As I go through, I'll do every right hand cutter. When I'm done with that, I'm going to take the chain off. I'm going to put the chain back on backwards because I don't want to turn around and face my back to the camera. And I'm going to do every left hand cutter. Once I got that locked in, now I have my left hand cutters. I'm going to go around here. Again, get my 30 degrees running parallel. I'm going to go through, and I'm going to give these 5. And I'm going to do that all the way around the chain. Once that's done, I'm going to check my rakers. Rakers, depth gauges, both basically the same thing. So this depth gauge tool has a groove in the middle that's slightly lower than the top. What you want to do is you want to set this on top of 2 cutters so the depth gauge is in the middle where the groove is. And you'll want to take a flat file and you'll want to file like that any protrusion that comes up above that on the depth gauge. And you can just go right around the chain and do that. So this is a 25 thousandths depth gauge, so it's setting these depth gauges at 25 thousandths. And you do that all around the chain. So now what you have is you have sharp cutters that are taking the proper amount of wood. And you have a perfectly sharp chain. When you're done with that, you'll want to take the chain off, take the bar out. Because you've got all the debris from sharpening, you want to take your bar cleaning tool, and you want to run it through the bar. You want to clean out any junk that comes out. As you can see, I'm pulling a lot of garbage out of this bar. Run it through a couple times, make sure it's clean, make sure it slides right through easily. Clean out any oiling holes you have. You also want to make sure you have a sprocket that's here in the front of the bar. You want to take the depth gauge tool and still go around the nose of the bar like this with the sprocket. Make sure there's no dirt in there. Once that's done, you're ready to put it back on the saw. This is also a good time. You'll want to rotate the bar. So if you ran it in this position before, when you mount it back on the saw, you'll want to turn it over. That way you get even wear on both sides of the bar. Yeah, so if you'll notice on this bar, you do see some wear spots here. It's also a good time to check it. Make sure it's straight. Make sure you don't see any wear, any bending of the rails out. If you don't see any, you can put the bar and chain right back on the saw. What you want to do is suggest though, since the chain is nice and sharp now, get yourself a little hefty bag, pop the chain into the bag, pop a little bar and chain oil in there with it, wrap it up tight so that the chain is soaking in the oil. Let it soak overnight before you put it back together. That way the chain will be nice and oiled when it goes back on the bar. Questions we get all the time is it hard to sharpen? Should I be worried about it? I'm nervous about doing it for the first time. And you shouldn't be. It's really quite easy. You can take your chain. Most hardware stores, lawn and garden shops will have chain sharpeners that will do it on a sharpener, but it's really not necessary as long as you've got the proper tools. These come in a kit. They come in a little pack like this. They don't cost very much, and you'll get well worth your payback on it for the multi-uses you get. Can you over sharpen a chain? Sure, you can over sharpen a chain. But as long as you just cut it back to fresh chrome and then stop, you should be fine. You should get probably 5, 6, 7 sharpenings per chain. There is a little tiny witness mark on these chains in the back, and that is as far as you can sharpen it back. So you can pretty much almost sharpen this all the way to it's nothing but a little triangle left and still have enough meat for the saw to do its job. Okay, another question we get all the time is when do I know I should sharpen? So a standard chain like this, a cross-cut chain, which comes with just about every chainsaw you buy, are designed to take out chips. If you're getting good sized chips from the saw while you're cutting, the chain is sharp. You'll notice when it gets dull, it's going to start to smoke a little bit. You're going to not be getting chips anymore, you're going to be getting sawdust. When you start getting sawdust, then you know the chain is dull, it's time to sharpen it. If you're cutting good clean wood all the time, it could be weeks before you need to sharpen. If you're cutting out stumps, if you're getting near the dirt, if you're cutting logs that are on the ground, all you need to do is get the chain running dirt for just a couple seconds, and the silica that's in that dirt will dull that chain very quickly. So if you get it into the dirt, you're better off having it sharpened right away. If you only have one chain, my suggestion would be get 2 chains. Always keep one sharp so you don't have to stop working right in the middle of the job to do it. You can just switch chains real quick. Another question is, when do I replace the chain? When it gets sharpened back to this witness mark back here is when it needs to be changed. Another question is, how do I tell if my chain's damaged? The way you do that is when you go to sharpen it, you're going to inspect it. It should slide easily through the bar like this. If it sticks or anything, either the bar could be bent or the chain could be bent. You're going to look at each cutter as it goes through. You'll see if one is damaged. If you find a damaged cutter, get rid of that chain immediately. You can't save it. So another question I get is, can a chain break easily? It's very hard for a chain to break. I've never seen one in my lifetime where a chain breaks. I've seen chains come off the bar, which can be very dangerous, and it's only because they're not tensioned properly. So as long as you tension a chain properly, as we've described in some of our other videos, you should have no problem with the chain staying on that bar and working safely. So another reason a chain could get knocked off the bar is if you're going through like a bunch of small twigs, and some of those twigs get jammed up under the bar and it could pop the chain off. My recommendation is chainsaws are for trees. They're not for doing bushes. They're not for doing small branches and twigs. You'll want a lopper, or you want a really small handheld, either reciprocating saw or chainsaw. But don't use a standard chainsaw to do really small twigs. If you ever do have to go replace your chain in your saw, you always want to replace it with what chain is recommended for that saw. There's different pitch and different gauge chains. You can either refer to your owner's manual. Many times the information is stamped right on the bar. There's pitch, drive link count, and gauge. Those are the three things you need to get the proper chain. If you don't have your owner's manual or it doesn't say on your bar, you can check our owner's manual tool, put in your model number, and it'll pop up the owner's manual for your particular saw. In there, under maintenance or under chains, it should tell you what those pitch, gauge, and drive link specifications. So while we're talking about sharpening, I just want to mention one more thing. Oregon has a sharpening system that sharpens the chain on the saw, and it's kind of unique because it uses a unique chain. Instead of a chain there where the cutter's underneath, the cutter sticks up at the top. So what would happen is when you're sharpening, when you're running the saw like that, and you wanted to sharpen the chain, all you would do is just flip this red lever a couple times. Now that completely sharpens this chain. And the way it does it is, it has a cutting stone right here that rides up against the chain. When I pull the lever, the cutting stone goes up against the teeth of the chain and sharpen it. Now this is on their electric saw, but they also have a version that would work on anybody's saw that uses a small saw that uses 3/8 low profile chain. So what it does, it has a sharpener on the inside. It comes with a special bar that has holes in the front. So you would take this, put this on the end of the saw, line up your holes, lock this back down, run the saw. As you're running the saw, you would push up against a tree, the ground, a rock, anything that would engage it. And this cutting stone then comes in contact with the chain. It's also unique that it has this little diamond impregnated gold cutter where every time it passes through the cutting stone, it actually lines it up. So it keeps it in shape for the rest of the cutters. So this is pretty unique. If you're nowhere near somebody that sharpens chain or you don't want to do it with a file, you can get one of these and put them on your saw. They usually run under $40 for this, and then this comes in different various sizes but also has the automatic sharpening. So I hope that if you're really not sure, scared you want to do your own sharpening, there's nowhere near you to sharpen it, you might want to consider one of these. This is the Oregon Power Sharp system. Check our website and we have the type of saws that this will fit on. That's basically all I have for today. I hope this was very helpful and we'll see you later.